Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, from Buenos Aires to Tokyo, the world reacts to the return of Donald Trump.
A fascinating election night in the United States of America.
الرئيس الأمريكي الثاني والعشرين للولايات المتحدة الأمريكية.
Que Donald Trump était le président élu des États-Unis. Donc c'était 11h30 heure de Paris, Elisabeth.
How are global leaders and citizens bracing for a second Trump term? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. As the results of the U.S. presidential election trickled in last Tuesday, it wasn't only Americans who were glued to their screens. People watched from all around the world, knowing the outcome would bring changes far beyond U.S. borders. Journalists at Al Jazeera were no different, each closely following the developments from their posts around the globe. We'll hear from 5 of them, from Europe to Asia to Latin America to the Middle East and Africa. They'll tell us about how this election is being viewed from abroad.
We have to put our country first for at least a period of time. We have to fix it.
As Donald Trump was declared the winner, reactions began pouring in from world leaders. And even people on TikTok pretending to be world leaders, recalling the ups and downs of his last term.
Congratulations, President-elect Donald Trump. Nah, I can't do it. Greatly look forward to working with you over the... Okay, no, I can't write that. That's not believable. That's ridiculous. Our two nations share an unbreakable bond until, of course, you decide to break that bond for no particular reason.
But among the real world leaders, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was among the first to send his congrats.
One piece of news is grabbing everyone's attention around the world: the absolutely convincing election result in America, a clear leadership of President Trump. I congratulate him on this victory.
Trump's win could mark a turning point in the U.S.'s longstanding support for Ukraine in its war against Russia, potentially giving Russia an advantage. Freelance journalist Niko Vorobyov watched the response coming out of Moscow.
Compared to 2016, when they were literally popping open champagne, the reaction to Donald Trump's electoral victory in Russia has been rather muted this year. There are high hopes in Moscow that a Trump presidency would be more sympathetic towards Russia and Russia's interests. That didn't quite play out how they wanted. Trump ended up arming Ukraine, slapping more sanctions on Russia. When it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, Donald Trump's made a lot of noise about either cutting off aid to Ukraine or slowing it down considerably, which is obviously a position that benefits Vladimir Putin's Russia on the battlefield.
For almost 2 years, Ukrainian soldiers have weathered sustained attacks from Russia's military, as well as forces from the Moscow-backed Donetsk People's Republic.
The most prominent public figure who's given a reaction that I've seen is the former president Dmitry Medvedev, who wrote on Telegram that basically, we can't really trust Trump to be on our side, but he is a businessman and hopefully he'll see sense of making trade and not war with Russia.
The overriding theme of Trump's campaign was America First.
After years of building up foreign nations, defending foreign borders, and protecting foreign lands, we are finally going to build up our country, defend our borders, and protect our citizens. It's called America First.
That approach would prioritize U.S. interests, whether in trade or immigration or involvement in international alliances.
He's criticized, for example, NATO, the other NATO allies, for not pulling their weight sufficiently in the past.
And other people were paying 1%. Some people were paying less than 1% of a very small GDP. It's not fair. And if they get attacked, we protect them, but it's not fair.
So I think with Trump's election victory, there's been a sense throughout NATO and Europe that the USA isn't a reliable partner anymore, one that they can count on.
This retreat inward, if Trump goes through with it, would be felt in many parts of the world, including our next stop, Southeast Asia, where Al Jazeera correspondent Tony Cheng is.
There's been a kind of mixed reaction to Trump's election victory. A few people here in Asia really quite happy, and those are the ones who see some kind of resonance in his hardline messages against migrants. Here in Thailand, for example, we've got a considerable number of people who'd like to see their government take a hardline approach, particularly on the number of refugees flooding in across the border from Myanmar, where there's been a very active civil war for the last 3 years.
The UN estimates 2.5 million people have been displaced by fighting since the military seized power in a coup in 2021.
But overall, I think people are quite unhappy. They're looking at this from a foreign policy perspective. They see the impact it's going to have on the conflicts in Ukraine, in Gaza. I think closer to home as well, people concerned about the impact that it'll have on the conflict in Myanmar.
The U.S. wasted no time calling the overthrow of Myanmar's democratically elected government on February 1st a coup. President Joe Biden said it was time for the military junta to pay the price.
And the real problem there is that countries like Myanmar, where there's been a very active civil war for the last 3 years, that need a lot of very sophisticated and shaded diplomatic attention, are just going to fall by the wayside.
Tony's watching that, but he also has his eye on another part of Asia.
One of the most memorable parts of Trump's first term in power was his relationship with North Korea, with Kim Jong-un, the man he nicknamed Little Rocket Man.
When I did it, and I was really being tough, and so was he, and we would go back and forth, and then we fell in love, okay? No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters.
And his re-election is likely to be received pretty well in Pyongyang. We don't know if there'll be any more summits like there were in the first term. But I think this news will also be pretty well received by some of East Asia's other authoritarian leaders. And I think that's also a concern here. We'd seen the Biden administration trying to reignite relationships with some of its more traditional allies. Thailand, for example, one of its oldest alliances in Asia. But that hasn't really been cemented. And I think we're likely to see, as Trump focuses on the domestic agenda, a lot of those tentacles that were extended over the last 4 years fall back. But the other real concern is about the economy. Clearly, the big relationship for Trump in Asia is going to be China. During his first term as president, we saw the Chinese have a pretty close relationship with President Trump. There were memorable images of chocolate cake being shared at Mar-a-Lago.
We had the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake that you've ever seen, and President Xi was enjoying it. And I said, Mr. President, let me explain something to you.
That said, Trump did introduce the policies of tariffs on Chinese goods that we've seen imposed, continued by the Biden administration. President Trump has talked about tariffs, trade barriers. If that really starts to hit hard, China's economy, which is already flagging, could be dented considerably. And that's a real problem for the rest of Asia.
China has taken out hundreds of billions of dollars a year from the United States. And I explained to President Xi, we can't do that anymore. We just can't do that anymore.
And if those trade barriers are put in place, that would have a huge impact, not just in China, as it's trying to get out of an economic downturn at the moment, but all across Asia, but all the way down in Singapore, Jakarta, and Bangkok.
And the ripple effects wouldn't stop there. The impact of this rivalry between two superpowers, it goes beyond the Asia-Pacific region all the way to South America. Al Jazeera's Latin America editor, Lucia Newman, takes us to Santiago.
During his last administration, Donald Trump threatened and pressured countries like Brazil, like Chile, even Argentina, many others to ease up their ties with China. He's very concerned about these inroads that he calls by the China in this area. And he's expected to pressure them again, these countries again, during this new administration. He doesn't seem to be offering anything else in exchange. One of the most interesting responses to the Trump electoral victory came from Javier Milei, the president of Argentina. He's very eccentric, like Donald Trump at times, and he was overjoyed. He jumped up and down. He raced to be the first Latin American leader to congratulate him.
You know you can count on Argentina to make America great again. And we know we can count on you to make Argentina great again.
He's hoping that Donald Trump is going to help him get his economy and his country out of the mess it's been in for years. But they really do see eye to eye on so many things, against abortion, pro-Israel, pro-big business. So he will probably be Donald Trump's go-to man, at least for the time being, in Latin America. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela.
En su primer gobierno, presidente reelecto Donald Trump.
We did not do well in the first administration of re-elected President Donald Trump. It is a new beginning for us to bet on winning, and for the United States and Venezuela to do well.
No love lost there between either one of them. Donald Trump had placed very, very harsh economic and financial sanctions on Venezuela when he was last in office. So this time, Maduro joked as a response to his election, "We hope to get along well, but I'll recognize your victory when you allow everyone to recount all the votes." That, of course, is a joke because Nicolas Maduro's electoral victory in July is being questioned by the United States and many other democracies around the world because he allegedly held a fraud and he is not allowing the votes to be recounted. As for ordinary people, I would say that in most countries, they are not exactly overjoyed with Trump's electoral victory. People see him as anti-migrant, as anti-Latin American, and as being too extreme. There is an extremist wave going on in many parts of the world, including in Latin America, and Donald Trump is seen as one of those. We have Javier Milei in Argentina. We used to have Bolsonaro in Brazil. And so one person I talked to said, I don't like Trump because of that. And he said, when these things happen, very often people in Latin America tend to imitate them. He's afraid that this trend will increase in the region now that Donald Trump will be going back to the White House. The migration issue is something else that really concerns Latin Americans, not just the government, but ordinary people. And I don't just mean those who want to migrate to the United States and who feel that they'll have the door now closed in their face, much more than they did before under Joe Biden.
Lucia's talking about the migration crisis that's been happening within South America itself. In particular, the 7 million Venezuelans who have fled political and economic instability and who've gone to other South American countries to seek asylum.
And the Latin American governments and ordinary people believe that they shouldn't have to bear the brunt of this, that countries like the United States need to help out, that there has to be a regional view, a regional strategy to deal with this unprecedented crisis. On top of that, there are people who want to migrate to the United States. We have Cubans, we have Venezuelans, people from Argentina who want to go to the U.S. and who now say that it will be even more difficult to do that than ever.
After the break, the view from the Middle East and Africa. It's clear from what we've heard so far that when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, the president's decisions ripple out across the globe. But those choices hit hardest in places already dealing with conflict, like the Middle East, where Trump is now going to play a key role in a highly volatile situation. Al Jazeera English correspondent Dorsa Jabbari is in Beirut.
Some people are actually more worried because they know that Trump's history with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was the first world leader to congratulate President-elect Donald Trump on his victory. Things are very tense, and I think many people are waiting to see what will happen when he actually does go into the White House, who he selects to lead his team dealing with the Middle East, I think could be very telling about what we could see happen in these countries in this region in the next few years.
So some people are worried, but Dorsa says the overall reaction she's seen has been indifference and skepticism that anything will change.
Whether it was Trump or someone else, American administration is the same, and it's the one that does the job. They are just a facade. Whether it is Trump or was Harris, it's bad news anyway.
So that is the Lebanese perspective. People are not concerned really or worried any more than they were before he was elected. Moving to the main part of the Middle East that is the most worried, I would say, and that is Iran. Iran and the US have not had diplomatic relations since the revolution of 1979. But things really deteriorated between the two countries when Donald Trump was last in office. And that was because in 2018, in May, he exited the historic nuclear agreement that was signed in 2015 between Iran and the world powers, known as the JCPOA, that was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. It was a historic deal that provided an opportunity for Iran to return to the world stage in exchange for limiting its nuclear program. Donald Trump said he didn't like the deal, it wasn't good for him, so he left, unilaterally imposing new rounds of sanctions on Iran.
The fact is, this was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made. It didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will.
That was a very, very difficult period for the then Rouhani administration. Of course, these are unprecedented times in Iran. They have attacked Israel twice directly from Iranian soil in the past year as a result of a number of assassinations that Israel carried out, not only inside Iran, but outside of Iranian members of the Revolutionary Guard, namely in Syria. So things are very, very tense in Iran. And speaking to ordinary Iranians, they're also not hopeful that it's going to change anything. And they know the rhetoric that they have heard from Donald Trump in the past. If that's any indication, things could get much worse for them in Iran and also in the region. The Iranian currency, the rial, has already plummeted to a record low over the past week as a result of the US election results and the worry that it brings with it. But having said that, officially, inside the country, it's going to be business as usual for the Iranian administration and the establishment as it continues to stand against what it calls the great Satan, that is the United States. Certainly, there is trepidation, there is a lot of skepticism about what Donald Trump could bring to this region, and also worry about what could happen in the next 4 years.
This feeling of uncertainty about what's to come is another common theme in the global reactions to 4 more years of a Trump administration, including from Africa, our last stop on this world tour. Al Jazeera correspondent Nicolas Haque is in Senegal.
Trump's presidency brings more uncertainty ahead more than anything else. There seems to be even less of an understanding of where the United States wants to go. The reaction to Donald Trump's victory has been a mix of admiration, certainly from the heads of states, and consternation from some members of the public. Admiration because his comeback and his victory against all odds is something that many African heads of state wish to emulate. But there's certainly consternation and fear of what is to come. While we've seen a diminishing influence of U.S. government foreign policy towards Africa, we've seen an increased influence from Christian far-right groups from the United States that have influenced policy on the African continent. And there is a sense among African analysts that that effect, that force will transpire in the White House and Trump's policy towards Africa. Africa wasn't even questioned or mentioned neither by Kamala Harris nor by Donald Trump. That shows the level of interest there is for the African continent. And there is certainly a sense that making America first also means making Africa last. Because let's not forget that Donald Trump, in his first term in office, well, he had some colorful language to describe some African countries. And when there was a head of state visiting the White House, he even talked about an invented country called Nambia, which does not exist. There's a lot at stake for African nations here, and we've seen US-African policy or US influence over the continent diminish. And so Russia and China are really stepping in, and so much of US foreign policy, whether it be the Democrats or the Republicans, have been in recent times about containing or confronting China's growing influence on the continent and Russia's new and increasing influence around the security sphere here on the African continent. And from the African perspective, they see increasingly the United States as one among many superpowers that they will negotiate and deal with for their own interests.
And that's The Take. What other countries would you like to hear from? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'll be reading through. We'll see you tomorrow.